Hello. Namaskar. We'll be continuing our discussion that we commenced yesterday, wherein we would want to simplify some of these concepts of literary criticism that often become very, very difficult for the students to really understand. And they're so overpowering in nature that you are just in a state of awe, and perhaps you find that it's better not understood. So in this video, we would want to study the core concepts. What are the core concepts? Let's list them out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that you're very clear. Okay, so we would begin with post-colonialism today. Colonialism, post-colonialism. Colonialism, as we know, was a period of Indian history, or maybe human history, wherein there were certain imperialist regimes that went to colonize other countries. It is in this context that the Indian situation becomes important. The period when the English were ruling in India is the colonial period, and the period following independence, that is after 15th August 1947, that period is referred in history as post-colonialism. However, the concepts that need to be understood is that colonialism, or the people who considered themselves superior, always looked upon themselves as the center. The binary that we have here is between the center and the non-center. The colonial rulers being the center, and the colonized other being the non-center, the periphery, or what they refer as the other. The colonizers looked upon themselves as executing the will of God, that perhaps God had given them the command in order to justify this entire period of colonization, that they would say that God gave them this task to go to those regions to spread the word of God and to spread civilization. The center here is always looked upon as having been empowered, while the savages are looked upon, the colonized others are looked upon as lacking the power or the ability to think and rule. If the colonized look upon themselves as adopting the active mode, working ceaselessly for the betterment of humanity, the other is useless, lazy, who needs help. Very often in this binary between the colonizer and the colonized, the colonizer is looked upon as the white men, and the other they're looked upon as black or brown. If the white are sensible, rational individuals, the black are insensible and irrational intellectuals. They are hard-working, focusing on the larger good, as it were, while the colonized others they do not know how to work hard. They're not builders, rather they are workers. And that, if the colonizers are morally and culturally superior, the colonized others are considered as immoral and devoid of a culture, and that they're racially inferior. So, putting things together, you have colonization on the one hand, or colonialism, and post colonialism. In order to understand these two concepts, one needs to remember that period of exploitation wherein a race captured the area of the country and established their domination, their rule on that area. So the colonized people are the other. The colonizers are the center, the other. The colonizer being the center, the colonized being the other, the periphery. If one is white, the other is black. If one is good, the other is bad. There was this accommodating, the entire thing in terms of binaries. If they're good, they're bad. If one is active, the other is inactive. So this purpose of othering was, as Edward Said says in Orientalism, a very deliberate strategy. The narrative was done very deliberately to construct the superiority of the West over the East, the superiority of the Occidental, as it were, over the Oriental. Following this study of ours, wherein we are trying to pinpoint the concepts, the effort to pinpoint primarily is to catch, to catch the bull by the horns. To catch the bull by the horns. So when we are talking of post-colonialism, we're talking of that period of, we're talking of the aftermath of colonialism. How things have to be correctly understood and interpreted. So we would pause here, for the moment, and then when we come back, we would take up some of those writers, who are associated with post-colonialism. Thank you. Namaskar. As I mentioned, let's now move from having understood the concept to some of the most prominent of writers, most prominent of critics that you have in post-colonial studies. A name that is a must-read for all is the name of Franz Fanon, Frantz, Fanon. The work that he wrote is referred as Black Skin, White Mask in 1952, and the other, of course, is The Wretched of the Earth in 1961. White and black, these two terms, as we were discussing when we were working on the concept of colonialism vis-a-vis post-colonialism, they come into being at the moment of the imperial conquest. Somewhere, the other tends to accept the collective consciousness of the French, wherein the collective consciousness of the colonizer, would be bracketed in terms of good, and good. And the collective consciousness of the colonized, would be bracketed as evil and sinful. So this work primarily engages itself with this issue. The second writer that again is a must read for everybody is Edward Said. The three important works that Edward Said wrote. The first, of course, which all of us should read, is Orientalism, 1978, Culture and Imperialism, 1993, and The Politics of Dispossession, 1994. The work primarily examines the ways through which the Orient was and continues to be constructed through the lens of Europeans. We're talking of the colonial gaze. We do not have our own identity. The colonized other does not have an identity of its own. It's looked through the lens, the Western European lens, defining Orientalism, you know, so that they could justify their entire ideology of domination and having established authority, over a large, section of the world. So Edward Seed goes on to say that this distinction between the Occident, the West is often referred as the Occident, the East is referred as the Orient, and that it has always operated in oppositional terms, ensuring that the Orient has been constructed as a negative, inferior version of Western culture. So here again, you find that one is superior, the other is inferior. If one is dynamic, if the Occident is dynamic, the Orient is static. So these binary oppositions, again, we would want to sum up today. Let's get this very clearly put. The binary oppositions. The West is dynamic. The West is rational. The West is peaceful, and the West is liberal. On the other hand, the East is static. The East is irrational. East is warlike. East is passion-ridden, and most importantly, East is immoral. So we'll pause here with these two critics today, and we would continue after a while. Thank you. After Franz Fanon and Edward Said, the third name that all students of post-colonial studies should be familiar with is the name of Homi Bhabha. Homi K. Bhabha wrote quite a few works. Within the works that are important for you are Nation and Narration, 1990, The Location of Culture, 1993, and Cosmopolitanism, 2002. The core ideas of Homi Bhabha, they are primarily three in nature. You could note down all the three. The first, his works encourage a rigorous thinking of nationalism, representation, and resistance. And that above all stresses the ambivalence or hybridity that characterizes the site of colonial contestation. The concept of hybridity that we have, you find that it is an offshoot of the writings of Homi Bhabha. He criticizes the supposedly homogeneous, innate, and historically continuous traditions that falsely define and ensure the subordinate status of third world nations. You cannot bracket. The idea is that it's incorrect to bracket somebody, and that, the third world nations have been bracketed, and that, of course, is, a very false position. He argues that cultures can be understood to interact, transgress, and transform each other in a much more complex manner than the traditional binary oppositions can allow. So, white and black, Franz Fanon, Orientalism, Edward Said, hybridity or ambivalence, so far as Homi Bhabha is concerned. And let's move on now to the next name, which is again a very well named, recognized name, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. The prominent works being In Other Worlds, 1988, Outside in the Teaching Machine, 1993, A critique of post-colonial reason, 1999. Gayatri Spivak criticizes the European literary and philosophical texts for providing ideological support for European colonialism and develops a feminist perspective. Postcolonial theory, according to her, focuses too much on past forms of colonial domination. By speaking out and reclaiming a collective cultural identity, subalterns will, in fact, reinscribe their subordinate position in the society. The academic assumption of subaltern collectivity becomes akin to an ethnocentric extension of Western logos. So this idea of subaltern, there's a new terminology which is given to the colonized other. What we read, what we studied a few minutes back, has a new term being utilized, for the colonized other, the subaltern, and again the binaries, the Eastern and the Western logos, the superiority, of one, the inferiority of the other. So, post-colonial criticism, as such, is a literary lens. Please note this very carefully. Post-colonialism is a literary lens. And the purpose of post-colonialism is to expose the injustices suffered by oppressed groups and to contrast between their worldviews, the oppressed first. It is a lens. So, colonialism, coming back, we began with colonialism, so let's finally get our thoughts clear. If you define colonialism, it is military, economic, cultural operation wherein it dominates over one country, wherein one country dominates over the other country. And that, these forms of colonialism could be in terms of invasion, in terms of settlement, in terms of internal colonization, and what, of course, we refer today as neo-colonialism. So what are the characteristics? Let's, put it on, pen and paper. What are the characteristics of post-colonial criticism? The first, an awareness of representation of non-Europeans as exotic or other. What is the effort being made by post-colonial criticism is that, we need to, do away, with the kind of representations which have been done by the Occidental. The second characteristic is, perhaps could be placed this way, to give back in the same coin. So the concern is primarily with language. Identity which was monolithic and perhaps monocentric has today, become unstable. There are multiple identities that you're talking about, and that the emphasis is on cross-cultural interactions. So post-colonialism, finally, let's put it very clearly and categorically, is a set of theoretical, critical strategies used to examine the culture, literature, politics, history of former colonies. So summing up, what we have tried to do in this particular session is that we have tried to identify some of the core ideas, the binaries of colonialism, and we have taken up some of the most prominent of post-colonial critics, beginning with Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, Homi Bhabha, and Gayatri Spivak, wherein now the effort is being, to undermine, the forms of representation, the various narrators which are given to us, by our so-called colonial masters. Thank you very much for giving a patient hearing.